Okay. Councillor Ioannidis has indicated he's still trying to work through his computer issues, so we can start. So I'll call this audit committee to order and welcome everyone to the audit committee for Monday, December the 14th. Due to COVID-19 and recommendations by Waterloo Region Public Health to exercise physical distancing, City Hall is open only for select services. Members of the public are invited to participate in this meeting electronically by accessing the meeting live stream video at kitchener.ca/watchnow. While in-person delegation requests are not feasible at this time, members of the public have been invited to submit written comments or participate electronically in the meeting by contacting Diana Saunderson, Committee Administrator, at diana.saunderson@kitchener.ca. That's diana.saunderson@kitchener.ca. Delegates would have had to register by 4:30 on December 11th, 2020 in order to participate electronically. Any written comments will be circulated prior to this meeting and will form part of the public record. We have two items on the agenda. One is a discussion item and one is a status report. And we'll begin with the discussion item, which is the 2021 internal audit work plan. And I'll turn it over to Ms. Tasker.
Great. Thank you, Mayor Barry. If you could just advance the slide for me, please. One more. Great. So today, first of all, I'm going to give you a bit of an overview of the internal audit goals, and then we'll get into what I've proposed for the work plan for this year. And we'll pause for some questions if you have any, and then ask for a motion to approve the work plan for 2021. So the overall goal of internal audit work is to protect our assets and interests here at the city. And I do that through either consulting or assurance type reviews that ensure that our operations are as effective and efficient as possible, that we have controls in place to protect our assets from loss, and that we are in compliance with applicable policies, procedures, and legislation. Next slide. My work falls into two broad categories of assurance and consulting services. Assurance services are what you would typically associate with internal audit and involve my objective assessment of evidence. The topics for assurance audits are chosen by myself and follow a rotating schedule of controls and compliance audits. Assurance services can also include confidential investigations based on tips. Consulting services, on the other hand, are more advisory in nature and are requested by senior management or council. They typically involve the improvement of design and delivery of city services, but can also involve other types of analysis, such as organizational structure reviews, value for money audits, or other analysis. Next slide, please. So for the 2021 work plan, I've separated the activities into the assurance and consulting types of work. For assurance items, we have the following. First is a comprehensive review of stores inventory in addition to the annual physical inventory. This review will look at their entire operation. The last time that I did a comprehensive audit in stores was prior to the move to the KOF, when inventory was housed in 3 different warehouses. So it's time to do another review. I will be doing 2 follow-up controls testing audits in the procurement and accounting divisions. These were areas where I've previously done comprehensive audits and status updates of the recommendations. So this is simply performing the controls testing components again, just to ensure that controls are all still adequate. The hiring transparency and nepotism audit is actually carried over from this year. And as you will see when I get to the 4th quarter audit status report, I was unable to complete this review due to the pandemic. Assuming that I can continue it next year, it will include both a status update of the recommendations from the original audits and additional compliance testing to see whether things have improved. I will also be conducting status updates of previously completed audits in the areas of the tool crib at the KOF, winter maintenance, the 4 utilities review, overtime and on-call pay, and computer hardware inventory. And finally, I will conduct any confidential investigations that come to my attention. Next slide, please. On the consulting side, I will be continuing to work on assisting to develop a risk assessment process for special event and facility bookings that occur on city property. This review came out of a recommendation from Public Safety Canada, who indicated we needed to have better coordination between event organizers, staff facilitators, and other agencies such as security, fire, and police. This will help to mitigate safety risks related to events and bookings. The second item is a service delivery review of the print shop. The review will look at future customer demand and requirements and make recommendations related to service delivery methods and improvements. So before we ask for someone to move to approve the work plan, are there any questions about any of the items?
We do have a few questions. I'll start with Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, sorry about that. Yes, my question was around, so our inventory of things like the stores, our physical inventory, hardware, etc. Have we considered, or do we have something like a GIS system that keeps track of our items so that we can better, it's a lot easier for you whenever we do an inventory. I'm thinking of a tagging system like we did with the picnic tables, for example. Do we do something like that with our inventories?
Are you referring to like RAF tags that go on them that you can scan and see where things actually are physically located? Is that what you're referring to?
Yes, and then it's a lot easier to monitor them.
No, so most of our inventory, so the inventory that I count every year and that I'll be doing the store's inventory, it's all located either in the warehouse at the COF. So they do have bar tags on them, but it's not like a GIS locator. And then the rest of the inventory is out in the yard.
Is that something we've thought about before? Just wondering. It might not be a question for you, of which I apologize, but as I was reading this, I thought, wow, that might be something we want to take a look into.
Yeah, I can't answer that question. I don't know.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Councillor Johnson, I think RFID works really well at a place like the library, where that same piece of inventory keeps coming in and out. Whereas, for example, if a water pump goes out, it goes out once from the city, so it's not like you're tracking it multiple times. So that might be part of the reason.
Well, just for supplies and things, sometimes that's really good as well. But I will leave that as an idea for the future. Thank you.
Councillor Singh.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, Karina, I saw the list, and I don't have much issue with the items that you have on there. I like the fact that there will be a winter operations review as well. The operations. I was looking to see for council, was there any review for the mayor and council office now that we're 2 years in? I know that there was a review done, I think either 2 or 3 years ago for the onset of this new term of council. And at that point we had new 3 members. And now that we're 2 years in, is there a merit for doing another review now that they have a better assessment of what their needs are to be as for effectiveness of them being on council and their engagement with the constituency?
So the audit that I had done a follow-up audit, I believe it was last year on the original audit. It would determine that I didn't need to come back to follow up on any of the action items. However, in terms of figuring out and taking inventory of what your needs are as a council, that is something that would now be operationalized through your chief of staff. So that would be work that would happen within the office. Now, if it's something that you feel that you need an objective third party, then you can certainly request my services and I could provide that.
On my assessment, I certainly think there needs to be, but I'll leave it to my colleagues and seeing if others have a similar view. And if there is, then I don't mind moving that, but that's just my my position so far. So, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Singh. I don't see any other questions. Someone want to move the internal audit work plan? Moved by Councillor Galloway Seelock, thank you. Second by Councillor Michaud, thank you. All those in favor? Any opposed? That is carried. The second item is the fourth quarter audit status report. And were you doing a presentation on that, Karina, or?
Yes,
Yep.
I am.
Okay, thank you.
All right. If you want to advance to the next slide, please. All right, so there are 4 audits that I'm going to share with you today, and I will pause between each one if you have any questions. So I'll be covering the computer hardware physical inventory, stores physical inventory, pandemic process changes, and a revenue status update. So as I mentioned in the work plan, I was supposed to have completed the hiring transparency and nepotism follow-up audit. However, this is currently on hold until following the pandemic. I'm currently also working on that special events and facility bookings risk assessment that I had mentioned previously. And I'm also helping the building division with some strategic planning by facilitating some workshops to identify their strengths, weaknesses, risks, and opportunities to their business. Next slide, please. So I'll start with the computer hardware physical inventory. And this is the first time that I've done this type of audit. It was based on a previous recommendation that I had made in the employee expenses audit. The objective of this audit was to ensure that our computer hardware assets are being adequately safeguarded from theft, either from staff or the public. The scope of the review only included those assets which are sitting in inventory and have not been assigned to an employee yet. It did not include the assets which are deployed to staff or the telephone assets which are also stored in the same location, but tracked and handled through a different process. Next slide. Before we jump in though, I'll just clarify what I mean when I'm talking about hardware assets. Here at the city, we track all of the high dollar value assets with a barcode asset tag. So if you look at your laptop or your desktop now, you'll see that asset tag as a small green barcode, which says property of Kitchener on it. These tags are attached to all monitors, desktops, printers, laptops, and docking stations, and are tracked in a database by serial number. Other smaller dollar items, such as mice, keyboards, and other peripherals, are also stored in the inventory room. However, they do not have asset tags and are not tracked in the database. The value of these items is less than the cost of the effort to track them. Next slide, please. For this audit, I started by doing a physical inventory count of all of the items in the inventory room. For any of the inventoriable items, I also compared the database to what was actually on hand. In addition to the main inventory room, I also toured 3 other rooms where assets are stored as they are being configured prior to being deployed to staff. I analyzed who had card access to each of these 4 rooms. I interviewed security and mailroom staff about the receiving processes when new shipments of assets arrive. And finally, I asked about the financial reconciliation process and explored with staff ways to do this in the future. Next slide, please. In terms of findings, I ended up counting 256 inventoriable items and 522 of the smaller dollar items, which I estimate to be worth about $8,000. When compared to the database, there were 9 docking stations which were missing. And this is likely because they were deployed with laptops, but never written down. The overall value of the missing items was about $1,200. I confirmed that the inventory rooms are all secured with card lock access. However, on examining who has access to the rooms, it was found that several staff who had either left the corporation or who had no business need to enter the room still had access. This was concerning and uncovered a larger issue in that there is no process for HR to inform security when staff leave or change roles, or an approval process to give access to restricted rooms. It has been recommended that such a process be created. The unnecessary access has been removed, and staff are now working on creating the ongoing process. Next slide, please. In terms of financial reconciliation, this is the largest risk in the process. Although the overall level of spend is monitored and individual purchases must be approved by employee supervisors, there is no control to ensure that what is ordered was received into inventory. It is possible for an employee to order hardware, take receipt of it, and then take it for personal use or resale. It is recommended that staff work to create a reconciliation process which would compare the assets which were paid for to the assets that are set up in the inventory database and to the inventory on hand. The biggest limiting factor with this recommendation is the lack of resources to perform this task. Next slide, please. The final piece of this review was to recommend that a full physical inventory of the assets that are deployed in the field be done following the pandemic and return to the office. This will be quite time consuming. However, it will be important to ensure that all assets taken home during the pandemic are returned and that everything that is listed in the database is being deployed still exists. So we'll pause now for any questions on this audit.
Hold on, I lost you guys.
I'm still here.
Sorry. Okay. Councillor Johnson.
Yes, thank you. And I think this is what I was trying to get at before. Is there a way of us having some kind of a tracking system that would do this for you instead of physically having to count? And that is incredibly time consuming. It would be very time consuming as well to get a system like this set up. But once it's in place, it would be doing this this type of thing for you, and you'd have an easier way of tracking it. That was not exactly a question, and I apologize.
That's a great idea though. And certainly when I responded before, I was talking more about the store's inventory. So yeah, this would really be applicable in this situation.
Thanks.
Councillor Singh.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Karina, so in your presentation, you mentioned that you'll be doing some review for the building department as well. Now, is that cost for service, or is that something that's that's included as an agreement with the building department? Mr. Mayor, my apologies. I have an overactive 2-year-old in the background, so.
So the reference to the assistance that I'm providing to building was simply helping facilitate some strategic planning sessions for them. So they are building out a strategic plan for the next 5 years in terms of where they need to focus and any improvements that they're making and things like that.
No, my question was, is that a fee for service? Like, are we recovering that time spent from the audit department to the building department?
No.
Can we?
I think Mr. Chapman's going to answer that question.
So through the mayor, yes, we do. So within the operating budget, which is where Karina Tasker's time is allocated, there's a $9,000 annual recovery from the building enterprise. And so they do pay a portion of our staff's office time. And so while we don't charge out for a specific audit, every year we recover a portion of our salaries from building for services such as this.
So Mr. Chapman, maybe you can answer this question. Do we do a thorough review every once in a while to ensure that we are recovering all costs in relation to involvement with the building department, as a legislatively mandated to have a separate budgeting apart from the city tax budget? Do we do internal review and seeing if there are rooms where we can, appropriately charge for space or cost for service or operations within the city hall that they, work that they're conducting? So for a cost recovery aspect.
Yes, so every couple of years we do a comprehensive internal charges review. That review was done most recently, I believe a year or two ago, and we're in the process of implementing the updated charges. And so, yes, that's what we do look at from time to time comprehensively to ensure that the allocations are fair and.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Davey.
Thank you. Not a question, just to piggyback on Councillor Johnson's comments for some of the high value items. Discussions with IT might solve some of that solution, some of that problem as well, because you don't even need GPS software these days too. There's tracking software built into whenever laptops, for example, connect to a Wi-Fi network. So that might help in that inventory management, but just something to take back to IT to maybe help solve this instead of the manual part as well. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Davey. Back to you, Ms. Tasker.
All right, if you could just advance to the next audit slide. There we go. All right, so now we'll be talking about the annual physical inventory, which you're familiar with. As you know, each year staff conduct a full physical inventory of the store's inventory to compare the inventory on hand to what's recorded in SAP. I then count a sample of the inventory to provide assurance that their counts are correct. Next slide, please. This year, myself and Susan White from Financial Planning did sheet to floor counts on the top 25 total value and the top 25 unit values. We also randomly selected 20 parts for the floor to sheet counts. Our sample accounted for 21% of the total inventory value. Next slide, please. From our counts, we found 2 variances, which represents 3% of the sample and resulted in a write-down of about $1,000. This is considered a low number and total value of variances. Next slide, please. So during this time, I also look at the total adjustments that have been made by staff to the inventory records throughout the year. These are split into controllable stock, which is located within the warehouse, and uncontrollable stock, which is located outside in the yard. Every year, we typically have small adjustments in controllable stock and slightly larger write-downs in uncontrollable stock. Like everything else in 2020, this year is a little bit different. And we ended up having a $63,000 write-up in controllable stock and a $3,000 write-up in uncontrollable stock. Next slide, please. So delving a little deeper into the root cause of why adjustments were different this year, it was found that there were 2 anomalies in the controllable stock. First, the gas utility parts expert went on a sudden, unexpected, and prolonged leave, meaning that other staff had to step in and complete the work. They did their best, but several errors were made, which resulted in $34,000 of write-up adjustments. Since then, staff have received extensive cross-training so that this doesn't happen again. The second anomaly happened as a result of the team working through a deep clean of the warehouse. They were looking for obsolete parts to remove from the space in order to make room for other parts. However, in the course of their cleaning, they also found several vehicle maintenance parts which were not captured in SAP, resulting in a $19,000 write-up to add them. Next slide, please. The second piece to the unusual numbers this year happened in uncontrollable stock. Usually we see large write-downs in the aggregates and salt when staff do annual estimates of the size of the piles and adjust the quantity in SAP accordingly. This year, the estimates were unusable, so no adjustments were made by staff. Instead, they've decided that as stock is depleted to 0, the adjustments will be made to the system before replenishing. So as a result, the overall net adjustments are right up this year. Next slide. However, if you put aside these one-time issues, the inventory process is in control. And if we excluded those anomalies from the numbers, the total write-downs would be around 0.7% of total purchases, which is where we would expect them to be. Next slide. So we'll pause now for any questions on this audit.
Councillor Gazzola.
I just want to ask, what's the size of the inventory that we're dealing with?
It's about 3 million. I believe it's in the report. I don't have it right in front of me, but we're sitting, it's usually around $3 million of inventory.
So this isn't the total city inventory that you're dealing with then?
It's just the store's inventory. So these are all the parts that are in the warehouse.
Okay. All right. It's a pretty small figure.
Yes.
And the it's quite interesting that that there are markups rather than markdowns. So there don't seem to be any problems there. That's fine. No. Thank you.
And there don't appear to be any other questions. So go ahead, Karina.
Great. Thank you. All right. So the next audit is the one that I added to the work plan mid-year as a result of the pandemic. Next slide, please. As business ground to a halt back in March, staff needed to quickly pivot to adapt their services in order to safely serve our customers. In addition, new processes were created specific to dealing with the pandemic. Many of these changes involve moving services, payments, and information online. Given the speed with which changes were implemented, I thought it was important to check to ensure that controls had been considered and were still adequate in these processes. So to conduct this audit, I surveyed directors in order to gather a list of all of the processes which had changed or been added. From there, I then interviewed the process owners of just the ones where there were controls implications. Next slide, please. I won't read through all of them, but you can see on the screen and in your report the list of processes which I reviewed. Most of these had adequate controls in place and no issues. There were 2, however, where I made minor recommendations. Next slide, please. The first was related to a new process that was enacted under the provincial emergency order, which allows temporary uses for housing or hospitals without a building permit. This would be for things like setting up tents in a hospital parking lot or for temporary housing in a hotel. Staff are still required to inspect the premises monthly to ensure all life safety features are still operational and everything is up to building code for the approved temporary use. Management was doing monthly inspections, but there was no process to ensure that this happened. I recommended a simple recurring reminder in Outlook to ensure that they completed their inspections. The second finding was also related to a new process around deep cleaning following a suspected or confirmed case of COVID-19. While staff did have a standard operating procedure to follow for the deep cleaning, there was no record that the cleaning had taken place or whether it had been supervised to ensure that it was done right. In order to keep an audit trail and prove due diligence in this area, I recommended tracking the cleaning on a work order and including the name of the supervisor on the record. As the pandemic is hopefully a one-time unique event, no further audit is required in this area. Does anyone have any questions?
There don't appear to be any, so you can move on. Thanks, Karina.
All right. So last audit for today. The final update is related to the status update of the comprehensive revenue audit that was done in 2017. Next slide, please. As with any status update, the objective is to hold staff accountable for implementing the audit recommendations. This time, however, the status update not only includes the status of the recommendations, but also a summary of the improvements that were made in the lean review portion of this audit. Revenue was the first division to undergo a lean review, so I'm really excited to share the outcomes with you today. Since this time, we have been building our lean knowledge and capacity corporately through training and experience with other lean reviews, such as the great work that's being done in the development services review. So you'll start to see more of these types of updates as we complete more lean reviews. Next slide, please. Audit portion, I'm pleased to report that all but one of the recommendations have been implemented, and the one that is still in progress relates to assessing the appropriate level of risk to accept related to refunds, write-offs, and deferred invoices. Previously, there were stringent management approval processes in place, which often slowed up the processing of these transactions. The intent was to strike a balance between controls and empowering staff to make decisions on some of the lower value amounts. Management has documented their decision on this issue and are just working on making system changes to SAP to support this. Next slide, please. Since this is the first report back on lean review outcomes, I'm going to take a moment just to explain at a high level what's involved in a lean review. The overall purpose of lean reviews is to examine our processes through the eyes of our customers and remove any steps that do not add value for them. The first step is to map out all of the activities in the current process. For revenue, this can be shown at a high level in 5 different macro steps, starting with the customer account setup and moving through invoicing, accounts receivable, collections if applicable, and deposit of funds to the bank. This process applies to all revenue streams, including taxes, utilities, and miscellaneous billings. Next slide, please. Next, we examine each of the micro steps to determine where there are non-value added activities. For example, in the customer account setup process, it was observed that staff were having to spend time fixing addressing errors. Next slide, please. In order to be considered value adding, an activity must meet all 3 of the following criteria. First, the customer must be willing to pay for it, or it's worth something to the customer. In our environment, this translates to the customer obtaining or perceiving value from the process, since many of our services they wouldn't willingly pay for or even want. For example, they don't want a parking ticket, but they would obtain value from having a streamlined process to pay the ticket. Second, the activity must transform the product or service somehow, meaning that it must transform the fit, form, or function in some way. So for example, moving a document from one floor to another is not a transformative activity, because nothing about the document has changed. It's simply a waste of transportation. Third, the activity must be done correctly the first time. Any time spent correcting errors, resubmitting forms, or following up on missing data is considered rework and is not value adding. Next slide, please. So now the third basic step in a lean review is to identify the problems for each of those non-value added activities and brainstorm root causes and possible solutions. In our example, we saw the symptom of the problem was staff spending time correcting errors. The problem is that the utility accounts do not match the property address. When we dug into the root causes of why this was happening, one reason was because the developer was changing the unit numbers in townhouse or condo developments after the utility accounts had been set up on our end. One possible solution to address the root cause and solve the problem is to require the developer to submit a drawing of how the units will be numbered at the start of the process, which is what will be used to set up the utility accounts and cannot be changed after the fact. This is just one example. In the course of this review, we looked at hundreds of activities, focused in on 16 problem statements, which each had multiple root causes and several solutions each. All of these were put into an implementation plan, which staff have been working on over the past 3 years. Next slide, please. So in your report, you will see a full list of improvements that have been made and the impacts that they've had. I won't go through them all, but I would like to highlight 4 of them here for you today, just to give you a flavor of the great work that's been accomplished. Early on in our review, we observed that customers were either waiting on a long time on hold when calling into the revenue division, or they were getting frustrated and hanging up. A deeper look at the data showed that there were 3 types of calls which were driving long call durations. So we figured if we could shorten the length of time required for those types of calls, then all customers would spend less time in the queue and there would be less dropped calls. 2 of those types of calls related to pre-authorized payment plans and collections arrangements. So for the pre-authorized payment plans, they documented frequently asked questions for the customer service reps in order to avoid transfers to the back office staff. They also eliminated a manual tracking sheet of pre-authorized payment requests that back office staff had been using and added the information to SAP so that all staff can view the status of requests. And finally, they created an online form and guidelines for customers, which was added to the website. All of these changes resulted in a 66% reduction in the total duration of pre-authorized payment calls, which translates into 59 days per year of time saved for both staff and customers. Similarly, the collections calls, standard operating procedures were created for the customer service reps in order to make initial arrangements with the customer, eliminating transfers to back office staff. The collection notices that go to customers now have that customer service phone number on it rather than the phone number for back office staff, which means that less calls are going directly to the collection staff, which has improved their efficiency and provided capacity to actually follow up on collections. These changes have resulted in a 40% reduction in the total length of collection calls, or a savings of 36 days per year of time saved for staff and customers. And the third improvement relates to the task of billing adjustments. A number of changes were made in this area in order to make the process of investigating and correcting unusual bills more timely. First, standard operating procedures were created so that the analysis is done consistently, no matter which staff is doing it. Next, they reorganized to spread the work between 4 staff instead of 1 staff to ensure that there was coverage and cross-training. They also collaborated with utility staff to improve inputs on service orders, and they eliminated calculations for differences between readings on the remote device and the meter, which were deemed unnecessary. All of these changes resulted in 154 days per year of staff time saved. Now, not all improvements were quantified. The last example I have relates to the addressing errors issue that I mentioned earlier. By agreeing with the developer ahead of time how units are going to be numbered, staff anecdotally have reported less corrections need to be made, which means there is less time being spent by customers and staff trying to figure out the errors. Next slide, please. All of the improvements that were made have in total increased staff capacity in the division. This has allowed staff to get a handle on their workload and decrease backlogs, which results in less stress for staff and faster service for customers. Previously, they had been overwhelmed by workload. It also meant that despite a growing customer base and increased workload over time, they have been able to maintain their core complement and not add staff to keep up with growth. In addition to the benefits that have accrued to the corporation, the most important outcome and the reason why we do this work in the first place is that we are providing better customer service and reduced wait times. So overall, I think this pilot lean project was a great success, and I do offer my congratulations and thanks to staff for embracing the lean philosophy. So that concludes the presentation. Are there any questions on this review?
There are a couple. Councillor Gazzola.
Yes, how many days of work does an average employee have? When you take out, we start with 365 days in a year, and you take out weekends and statutory holidays and vacation. How many chargeable days would an employee have?
About 252.
Okay, I came down lower on the basis that everybody gets about 3 weeks holidays. Anyhow, we're saving here 249 days. Does that mean that we were able to reduce our staff by one?
No, so as I said in the report, the reductions in hours were spread out across a number of different positions. So you would not be able to take any one position. And prior to doing this review, they were actually very overwhelmed with their workload. They had huge backlogs of work, and they're continuously growing their customer base. So they have more and more workload as the city grows, as we develop and have more customers. So this has really just allowed them to bring their workload to a reasonable level, reduce their stress to a normal level, and allow them to keep their core complement the same without having to add more staff as we grow as a city.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Gazzola. I'm just alert. Councillor Ioannidis has come in here now. He's having trouble as well with the public Wi-Fi, and I'm also understanding that Councillor Michaud's having internet issues today as well. I know there was a big issue via Google earlier this morning that I read about on social media. So I'm not sure if Rogers is having an issue this morning as well, or Bell, or either or. But perhaps clerks can follow up with IT and check, because we may have to, if we're having too many people with problems, we may have to relook at how we're handling today. At this point, Councillor Marsh, you are next in the queue.
Thank you. And thank you, Ms. Tasker. I just wanted to ask, so can you remind us which staff team were you working with on this example that you were talking about?
Revenue division.
Just revenue.
Yeah.
So do they work on just tax revenue, or are they involved in the kitchen utilities revenue as well?
Yeah, so it includes taxes, utilities, and all miscellaneous billings. So this was focused on the revenue division, but when we did the lean review, we actually brought in utility staff to be part of the team, as well as other stakeholders from parking, from cemeteries, different areas like that have miscellaneous billings to get their input as well.
Okay, great. And so did you do a train the trainer on the lean review process so that it wasn't just you who's going to walk people through, or is it you that takes teams through the lean process?
No, we are expanding our capacity. So we have 17 green belts, which is kind of an advanced level of lean training across the corporation, across departments. So they are all qualified to lead these reviews. We also have online training that anyone can take at the basic level, that you can start to do mini lean reviews in your own areas on your own tasks as well, without needing a facilitator per se.
Oh, okay, great. Well, thanks very much. It's very, very good to see that we are able to make improvements in this way. Thanks.
Okay, those appear to be all the questions, Karina.
Great. So that's it.
That's it for your update. Thank you. And I don't believe a motion's required for this. So thanks for all your great work over the past year, and we look forward to reports throughout 2021.
Great,
So
thank you.
all the holidays. Motion to adjourn from the audit committee. Moved by Councillor Singh, second by Councillor Johnson. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Okay, we'll move right into special counsel. Clerks, let me know when we're good to start that.
You're good to start now, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Budd. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's special council meeting on Monday, December the 14th. Due to COVID-19 and recommendations by Waterloo Region Public Health to exercise physical distancing, City Hall is open for select services by appointment only. Members of the public are invited to participate in this meeting electronically by accessing the meeting live stream video at kitchener.ca. Watch now. While in-person delegation requests are not feasible at this time, members of the public have been invited to submit written comments or participate electronically in the meeting by contacting Jeff Bunn, Manager, Council and Committee Services, Deputy City Clerk, at jeff.bunn@kitchener.ca. That's jeff.bunn@kitchener.ca. Delegates must register by 8:30 a.m. on December 14th. That would have been this morning in order to participate electronically. Any written comments that have been received will be circulated and will form part of the public record. There are a number of items to go in camera. Does somebody care to move that? Moved by Councillor Johnson, second by Councillor Ioannidis. Councillor Marsh, you have a question?
Yeah, I believe there's a late starter to the agenda for caucus, and I just want to declare a conflict of interest.
Okay, I'm not aware of that.
Okay, we received an email late Friday from Mr. Bunn, and
Sorry, hold on.
anyway, I just want to, I'll submit the required paperwork.
Just give me 1 second.
It was regarding the air rights, Mr. Mayor.
That is a report that's going on to committee of the whole, so that will be for this evening.
Okay, my apologies.
Okay, thank you. So with that, motion to go in camera, it's been moved already. So all those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Motion to recess. Councillor Galloway-Seelock, seconded by Councillor Marsh. All those in favor? Opposed? That is